We know that existed.
Correct. Yeah. That
the
was
Interplanetary Phenomena Unit. We know that existed, which is crazy. We knew that a group named that existed between what, 47 and 50 or something?
47 to 50.
He's given these like binaural beats, and then like basically he's used as like a sort of, human antenna for like alien signals. Right. And it's part of this thing he calls Project Preserve Destiny. And he says that he's genetically been manipulated in the womb. And more. I interviewed yesterday a psionic asset who was recruited through the GATE program, through these gifted student programs or whatever. And so I think more and more is coming out of the woodwork around like kids and gifted people and like clairvoyance being approached at a very young age for downloads and signals that they're getting. And there's a guy named Andrei Puharich, who I believe he wrote a book called The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. And he had these space kids back in the day where he'd recruit all these kids to upstate New York. And he had this Round Table Institute in Maine. And it was the space kids were meant to basically get downloads from, and Star Trek came from one of these downloads. Wow. Gene Roddenberry was inspired by this woman named Phyllis Schliemann. I don't know, Phyllis something. Yeah. And that sort of inspired all of Star Trek. And EG&G, I think, actually picked up a lot of the work there. And so it's super fascinating.
That's similar to like Tim Taylor, right? He said some of the ideas for his businesses came via like unknown downloads to his head. Isn't that what Diana Pasulka has kind of said around him and his work?
Yeah, that he engaged in protocols to basically download all sorts of information. And he I believe started a biotech company called Vivex Biotech and sold it for $88 million or something crazy like that. And he claims that a lot of that was derived from downloads that he got. And I spoke to him for a very brief period of time over the phone once. He sort of disappeared on me after that. And, his whole thing was like, don't use your phone and tap in and like, it all felt like, on the one hand, cliche, but maybe actually really fundamental, important advice as far as, being able to gain access to, better stuff or whatever from I don't know. The whole thing's really trippy.
Well, it's been an interesting year so far, right? With all kind of the mention of psionics. I mean, I'm sure I speak for a lot of people when I speak for myself here. I don't really like to use the word nuts and bolts. I think it's super cliche and overplayed. But kind of my focus is in legacy program research, crash retrieval, reverse engineering, stuff like that. So the whole psionics territory with Jake and stuff is still uncomfortable territory for me, but there's still so many lines of research and stuff I do that harken back to this. One example is Philip J. Corso. I recently did a project on Corso. Corso stated that in 1960, he was recruited to the U.S. Army's Foreign Technology Division. This isn't to be confused with the Air Force's Foreign Technology Division. Two separate things. Under Lieutenant General Arthur Trudeau. Now, the Foreign Technology Division, there's no records of it. It's similar to the Army's Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit that probably only exists through institutional record. Right. There's no record. But in Corso's testimony...
Which, by the way, we know that existed.
Correct. Yeah.
That was the Interplanetary Phenomena Unit. We know that existed, which is crazy. We knew that a group named that existed between what, 47 and 50 or something?
Yeah, 47 to 50. And that was first confirmed in 1986 to UFO researcher William Steinman.
Exactly.
And in the Majestic documents, there's an IPU report, Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report, and an IPU field order. Two documents still disputed, but...
So those are disputed, but the Steinman thing, I believe Steinman contacted somebody in the federal government to gain more access, and they basically said the records had been deleted.
Yeah, and that it only existed in institutional memory.
That's right, but it existed. And so that's just so fascinating.
And I'll get back to Corso, but maybe we'll talk about the IPU documents later, because that actually talks about like a crash retrieval that killed technicians at Sandia National Labs because of the danger of the crash. But so Corso worked for the Foreign Technology Division. This is not in dispute. You can look through his official military records that said he was the chief of the Foreign Technology Division, not out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. But the crux of his testimony is that under Arthur Trudeau in 1958 to 1962, we saw the golden age of Army R&D. And this is where materials recovered from the Roswell crash and possibly other crashes, maybe Aztec, maybe crash at Corona, plains of San Agustin, and so forth, that the U.S. Army would partner with the U.S. industry to figure out how these technologies work and seed them back primarily to help the U.S. military, and secondly, help the American people if necessary. Well, we know we never saw the American people if necessary, but it wasn't just to see the technologies, it was also to improve upon existing technologies. There's a lot of contention here because some of these technologies were passive night vision systems, and guys like Colonel John B. Alexander, who, has made some lies about the Majestic documents before, dispute this, and stuff like the transistor and integrated circuit. But I like to focus on other stuff because the golden age of Army R&D has a lot of really interesting research we can parallel today and talk about later. But Corso also states during this time that the Foreign Technology Division was trying to use recovered technology to use human brain waves to guide ICBM missiles and ballistic missiles.
Really?
Yeah.
That is so interesting. I didn't know he said that.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So this is Philip J. Corso wrote this book called The Day After Roswell, and he wrote it in 97?
97. But The Day After Roswell has a bunch of fluff added by its co-writer.
That's interesting. And he wasn't super happy about that, right?
No. Rumor has it he only had 24 hours to edit it, and according to his son, he put his hand to his head and said, "I can't believe this."
That's so interesting because I was just talking to James Fox, who has an interview with Philip J. Corso, and we need to put this out. It's not public.
No, it is. It is.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
He said he's sitting on 3 hours, and maybe
only
part
20
of
minutes.
I think
published.
a little bit's public.
And it's published through Greer, weirdly enough.
Yeah. No, so I think more can come out. And he was like, basically James Fox said, "Gun to my head, I get shot if I'm wrong. I think Philip J. Corso was legit." And so that's fascinating. He had a co-writer that might have kind of co-opted his process in some way, because there is stuff in that book that's, I think, clearly false.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the tech tree around integrated circuits and semiconductors, I don't think you need alien intervention to describe. There's I think a Munich patent on a transistor that goes back to the 30s.
Yeah.
But I do think we saw this stepwise leap in, interesting technology around this time, especially in material science. And I do believe the basic Roswell story, that some sort of, this memory metal. And I believe Jesse Marcel, this Air Force flight surgeon, that, may have handled this, memory metal material, and that it probably did make its way to Wright Airfield at the time, which Wright Airfield would have been the place you would have taken it, because they were basically reverse engineering adversary tech. They had
like MiGs, Russian MiGs later on, but
in 1943 they successfully reverse engineered a German pulse jet engine. So they were already successfully reverse engineering adversary retrieved technology. So it makes total sense that you'd take something there. And then basically to complete the loop on Philip J. Corso, he says that material is taken to Roscoe Hillenkoetter. Roscoe Hillenkoetter is the first director of the CIA, makes the call that Corso should be in charge of doling this out to basically civil side use cases, for commercial purposes. So like Bell Labs would be like the main place.
Bell Labs, Sperry Rand, which went defunct, and its divisions went to Northrop, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and others. And so Philip Corso actually has a manuscript. It's called Dawn of a New Age. And so for my research on Corso, I read the two side by side and went through every single difference. Remarkably different. For example, in Day After Roswell, there's a passage about how Corso intimidated a CIA director to off himself, which is absurd. And of course, you don't see that in the manuscript.
Oh, they psyoped him, man. And he had 24 hours to edit it.
Yeah.
What else?
The first chapter of the book is like a detailed description of Roswell as if somebody was there. Corso never talks about that stuff. He doesn't know what happened at Roswell. He just takes the materials he's seen. Another example is continued mentions to the Majestic documents in Day After Roswell. They're only passively referenced once in Dawn of a New Age. However, in Dawn of a New Age, Corso also states interesting stuff that he found after his time in the Foreign Technology Division. And maybe we'll get into that later, because we can circle back to the psionic stuff with other really old research we can dig into. But, Corso would talk about stuff like a UFO working group, which there's reason to suggest maybe the Majestic 12 changed into that along the way. But what I wanted to say about the psionics as well is, and just kind of the mental phenomena, I want to route this back to three key players: Dr. Eric A. Walker, Dr. Robert Sarbacher, and Wilbert B. Smith. So this story takes place around 1950. Wilbert B. Smith was a Canadian radio engineer who had a huge interest in flying saucers after reading The Flying Saucer Conspiracy by author Frank Scully. Dr. Robert Sarbacher was the scientific advisor to the Research and Development Board spearheaded by Vannevar Bush. Around 1950, Wilbert Smith met with Robert Sarbacher to talk about flying saucers because the Canadian government wanted to use sort of the Earth's magnetic field for propulsion. And he thought after reading the flying saucer conspiracy, there may be some sort of connection. And during this meeting, Robert Sarbacher said stuff like, well, in the 1950, there were meetings about flying saucers. The U.S. government studies them. It's spearheaded by a group of Vannevar Bush. I can't tell you what they're from or what they're made of, but we know they're not made by humans. And so Wilbert Smith relayed that in a 1950 Department of Transportation Canada memo that was then reduced from top secret to, I think, restricted access or confidential in 1960 something, and then completely unclassified later. But so Wilbert B. Smith took that and met with Sarbacher and these guys again to really get involved with UFOs. And Sarbacher basically said, I can connect you to the proper American authorities to engage with more UFO research if you can A, become cleared, and B, give something back. And so Wilbert B. Smith, he would later on go to spearhead Project Magnet, which was Canada's first UFO investigation group, followed up by Project Second Story. But when he finally met again with the Americans, he learned other things such as, Vannevar Bush spearheaded the group. He knew that. He had a couple more things, but he also said that the U.S. authorities studying UFOs were obsessed with the mental phenomena that accompanied UFO research. So later on down the line, there was also a gentleman, Dr. Eric A. Walker. This guy is super esteemed. He was Penn State University's president, one of the smartest people of the entire 20th century. He was named in a conversation to William Steinman, UFO researcher, that one of the attendees of these meetings in the 1950s about UFO crash retrievals was Dr. Eric A. Walker. Dr. Eric A. Walker would stay silent for a long time. He was first contacted in, I think, 1984 by William Steinman. He returned William Steinman's letter really cryptically with a typed thing saying like, go, leave me alone.